Fighting oppression has always been central to Marxist theory and practice. Genuine Marxists have never counterposed working class unity to fighting against racism. On the contrary, the fight against all forms of oppression is an indispensable condition for that unity. From 1920 to 1950, the CPUSA, the Communist Party USA, was one of the most influential organizations of the working class and Black population in the country. The orientation of the party toward the Black liberation movement arose from an intense internationalist collaboration and debate between the communist militants in the US and the Communist International, and the influence of Black radicalism. The Communist Party's work against racism in the 1930s confirms both the necessity and the practical possibility of uniting Black workers, Black and white workers, not only around economic struggles common to the working class, but also over issues of anti-Black racial oppression. That the Communist Party ultimately compromised its commitment to fighting racism reflects not the fact that Marxism has historically sold out Black struggle, but that the Communist Party in the 30s had abandoned Marxism and become a thoroughly Stalinist party. The importance of reconstructing the relationship between Black struggle and socialist revolution is not merely a historical exercise. This chapter in history demonstrates that Marxism is not a white ideology, but rather has served as a guide for the revolutionary emancipation of the oppressed majority. So let's talk about Marxism and the Communist Party. And Marx and Engels' writings still provide a brilliant starting point for understanding the role of racial and national oppression. Lenin brought Marx up to date for the period of imperialism. US socialists at the turn of the century had been trained in anti-racism, but even for Eugene Debs, a founder of the Socialist Party of America and the IWW, and one of the most prominent figures in socialism, in US socialism, racial oppression did not deserve special attention. It was underemphasized. It was therefore not surprising that the nascent Communist Party would still be blind to the importance of the Black question or what was called the Black question in the United States, or what was called the Negro question, excuse me. The Bolsheviks, while not experts on anti-Black racism in the US, believed that special oppression was so integral to capitalism that struggling against it could spark broader struggles. As early as 1913, Lenin had noted the importance of the fight against anti-Black racism, writing, "The position of the Negroes in America in general is one unworthy of a civilized country. Capitalism cannot give either complete emancipation or even complete equality." Lenin and the Comintern leaders pushed the US communists to take a more revolutionary approach to fighting oppression, racial oppression. Under their influence, the Communist Party broke with the Socialist Party's class reductionist policy in the US that saw racism simply as an extension of class oppression. In 1920, Lenin insisted that John Reed, and we know him, the author of 10 Days That Changed the World, right? Shook the World, yes, thank you. That was good. It's like pantomimes, charades. All right, Lenin insisted that John Reed present a special report on the matter for the Comintern on the matter of racial oppression in the US. And Reed, it included in that, he said, the communists must use this movement to expose the lie of bourgeois equality and emphasize the necessity of the social revolution, which will not only liberate all workers from servitude, but is also the only way to free the enslaved Negro people, end quote. The Communist Party was the first US socialist organization as a result of this work with the early Comintern to recognize that the specially oppressed condition of Blacks required that socialists champion the fight against their legal, political, economic, and social oppression. In this early period, there was a Black nationalist group called the African Blood Brotherhood. and they ended up being so impressed with the Communist Party that they fused, or they joined the Communist Party and became some of the first Black cadre. These people include Cyril Briggs, Richard Moore, and Harry Haywood. But then here comes the impact of Stalinism. Though Comintern intervention had helped the fledgling Communist Party, by the onset of the Depression, as the Russian Revolution degenerated, so too did the Comintern. Stalin's bureaucratic rule from above replaced the democracy of the Soviets from below. The Stalinist bureaucracy used the enormous prestige of the Russian Revolution to transform the Comintern from an organization dedicated to world revolution into an organization subordinated to the foreign policy interests of the USSR. In 1928, the Comintern declared the third period, which it predicted widespread economic collapse and mass working class radicalization, and a time that was ripe for proletarian revolution. While the second period, from 1923 to 28, was characterized by the United Front policy, communist parties around the world were now ordered to reject any united front with social democrats, who were denounced as social fascists. They were to form separate dual red unions controlled by the communist parties, and the main enemy was not fascism, which sought to annihilate the working class movement, but the reformists and the trade union leaders. The result of this seemingly super left-wing theory was furious activity in isolation from the mass of workers who were still influenced by the reformist organizations. And this was combined with a practical passivity toward the building of united struggles with non-revolutionary workers. This policy did not represent a genuine commitment to revolution. Quite the contrary, Stalin wanted to prevent social upheavals that might provoke intervention against Russia from foreign powers. This was a policy that prevented an aggressive united front against Hitler, that ultimately prevented an aggressive united front against Hitler. In Germany, the third period line proved disastrous. The refusal of the Communist Party there to unite with the mass Social Democratic Party against Hitler opened the way to his victory. In the US, the third period policy of denouncing all political forces to the right of the Communist Party as fascist or social fascist, from FDR to the American Federation of Labor to the Socialist Party, these were all denounced in that way, cut the Communist Party off from thousands of potential recruits and allies in the struggle. Sounds familiar. Just kidding. Over time, the Communist Party's zigzagging policies in response to the demands of Stalinist foreign policy weakened its appeal and demoralized many militants it had attracted to its ranks. In spite of its degeneration, the enormous prestige of the Russian Revolution attracted to the Communist Party the best working class militants. And as the struggle picked up in the mid-30s, the Communist Party became the main vehicle for radicalization among workers. I won't go through the numbers. So in 1928, the beginning of the third period, the Comintern declared that Black people in the US constituted a nation, and they called for, quote, self-determination in the Black Belt. The Black Belt was a swath of territory cutting through the South, known for its rich, dark soil, where Black people were concentrated in large numbers. The self-determination slogan was the American version of the Comintern's new theory that national liberation struggles had to go through two distinct stages. First, a bourgeois nationalist stage, and only after that, the struggle for socialism. By 1928, Stalin insisted that his stagist theory of national liberation was the orthodox Leninist position. This approach subordinates the needs of workers to those of the middle class in the oppressed nation. And that middle class, time and time again, upon victory, turns its back on its former allies. By contrast, Lenin's theses on the national question insisted that communists must avoid giving nationalist movements a communist color and must, quote, uphold the independence of the proletarian movement, even if it is in its most embryonic form. In the early 30s, it was the Communist Party, not Black workers and farmers, who called for self-determination of the Black Belt. There was no basis in the conditions or in the aspirations of Black people themselves for demanding a separate state in the Black Belt. And the call for a separate state in a society of enforced segregation could be interpreted as supporting segregation, not fighting it. This may explain why the slogan was never pushed in the North and was quickly and quietly dropped in the South. But it did have two positive impacts on the Communist Party. It pushed the party to emphasize organization of Black workers, and it drove the party into the southern states. So a little more about the setting. The 1930s were a period of economic crisis and mass working class radicalization. FDR's National Recovery Act of 1933, a program of government spending aimed at alleviating the impact of the crisis, actually worsened conditions for Black people. The Depression created the conditions for a mass explosion of discontent among all workers, but particularly among Black people. And the fact that the Communist Party made it a priority to raise demands around racism as a part of the general class struggle meant that Black workers were more receptive to its class appeal for united struggles of Black and white workers. The Communist Party initiated a multitude of struggles against racism through the Depression decade and systematically developed and promoted Black leaders in the organization. As a result, the party's Black membership grew from 200 in 1930 to 7,000 in 38. This represented a small but important step in building a multiracial movement at a time when segregation was rampant legally in the South and de facto in the North. The Communist Party was virtually the only integrated organization in the country. In 1930, in the early years of the Depression, the Communist Party called demonstrations against unemployment. They demonstrated against evictions. These were massive multiracial demonstrations and actions that hadn't really been seen before. At a hunger march at the Ford plant in Detroit, in 1932, that was organized by the Communist Party, cops killed 4 people. And the funeral procession that followed was the largest demonstration in Detroit up to that time. However, third-party sectarianism toward other political forces weakened the impact of their work. Its militancy tapped into a growing anger and bitterness that other organizations at first would not touch, but its championing the needs and rights of Black workers earned it a reputation as anti-racist that attracted significant numbers of Black people into its ranks. So a little bit about the campaign to free the Scottsboro Boys. In 1930, 9 poor Black men and boys aged 13 to 11 were charged with raping 2 white women on a freight train. There was no evidence implicating them or even that a rape had taken place, but the 9 were tried, convicted, and sentenced to death within 2 weeks amid a lynch mob atmosphere. The Communist Party led an organization called the International Labor Defense. That's the ILD. I'll talk about it more later. The ILD quickly moved on the case, and they won the defendants and the parents over to a campaign that involved both a strong legal defense and a protest movement to secure their release. And it was the first challenge to the exclusion of Black people. Sorry, some of this writing, they say Blacks, and I prefer to say Black people. So sorry, keep correcting that. For the first time, they challenged the exclusion of Black people from juries. The Scottsboro case divided the Black population along class lines. The NAACP went out of its way to distance itself from the Communist Party. And the Communist Party was so sectarian that when the most famous liberal lawyer in the country, Clarence Darrow, offered to help defend the Scottsboro boys, the ILD attorneys would only accept his help on the condition that he renounce the NAACP. But at the same time, one of the mothers ended up referring to herself as one of the Reds and became an effective speaker in the campaign. The ILD's strategy of organizing a mass multiracial campaign to free the Scottsboro boys was ultimately vindicated. Had the Communist Party not moved quickly to organize a mass national campaign, the Scottsboro case would have quickly ended in a typical Southern lynching. Instead, it became a rallying cry against injustice and proof that Black and white workers could unite as a class in the fight against racism. All right, so in Alabama, the Communist Party organized in Alabama a lot around Scottsboro boys and other stuff. These were conditions of repression that were comparable to Tsarist Russia. State and vigilante terrorism against labor and anti-racist activists was common. Nowhere was the relationship between class exploitation and racial oppression clearer. The Southern ruling class had developed a carefully constructed system of racial violence and segregation designed to exploit both Black and white workers more effectively. The Communist Party was feared and hated because its call for Black and white unity and equality threatened to destroy this edifice. The Communist Party's gains were made by agitating around immediate issues of dire concern for Black workers. And the Black Belt theory really didn't play much of a role in that. Let's see, so this is in the South. They had great success. In Harlem, on the other hand, the Communist Party's third period ultra-leftism was much more damaging because it prevented the Communist Party from calling for principled unity around immediate struggles that would have helped win Black people away from the nationalist Garveyites or the liberal NAACP. So not long after Hitler's victory in 1933, the electoral victory, or managing to come to power, in 1933, the Comintern made a complete about-face. Fearing a Nazi attack on the USSR, Stalin sought to create military alliances with Britain and France. In line with this new approach, the ultra-left third period line gave way to its exact opposite, the Popular Front. The communist parties around the world were now called upon to unite with everyone, even bourgeois parties, to bring pressure to bear on the democratic anti-fascist countries. In the US, the Communist Party suddenly became uncritical apologists for FDR and the New Deal. Formerly denounced as fascist, Roosevelt now became the most outstanding, quote, the most outstanding anti-fascist spokesman within the capitalist democracies. The Communist Party Earl Browder, listed among Roosevelt's accomplishments in 1937 the enforcement of the rights of Negroes. The sectarian approach of the third period hadn't badly damaged the Southern communists there because they were really the only force trying to organize working class Black people around economic demands. It didn't matter. But the new Popular Front line was fatal to Black Southern communism. The party sacrificed its role in the Black working class to pursue right-wing Democrats. Sounds familiar. In 1937, supposedly forging an anti-fascist alliance with democratic bourgeois forces, the party endorsed a Democrat for Congress who opposed anti-lynching legislation. The party dissolved the Sharecroppers Union into two predominantly white AFL-affiliated organizations. In an effort to ally with liberal Democrats in the South and reformist organizations in the labor movement, the Communist Party abandoned the principle of class independence and thus its revolutionary roots. The Stalinist bureaucracy halted the CP's organizing within the Black liberation movement under the argument that by appearing before the masses as a Black organization, the party was alienating white workers. This correlated with its support for the New Deal and for its subordination to the emerging labor bureaucracy. This is such a tragedy. By 1943, there was not a single party organization left in the South. In the North, the Popular Front, by contrast, helped the party gain members, allies, and sympathizers for a time, but at the expense of a distinctly communist line. Party members were expected to downplay or hide their membership and tail liberal allies. The CIO's condition for bringing in Communist Party members as union organizers, which was accepted by the Communist Party, was that they downplay their politics and behave merely as good activists. Again, I'm sure this sounds familiar. Though Communist Party members were key leaders on the ground in the sit-down strikes, Communist Party members were key leaders on the ground in the sit-down strikes. Communist Party leaders backed the union leadership's efforts to put a stop to them. This tendency was reinforced by the CP's orientation on acquiring leadership positions in the bureaucracy. This orientation also dampened the Communist Party's commitment to fighting racism. In 1936, the party and Black liberals established the National Negro Congress. CP members were now expected to downplay at best and completely hide at worst their membership in the party. The CP's accommodation to FDR and New Deal liberalism meant that supporting the Democratic Party, which refused to challenge segregation for fear of alienating its Southern, quote, Dixiecrat wing. Southern New Dealers refused to challenge lynching, Jim Crow segregation, or the restriction of Democratic primaries to whites only. That didn't stop the CP's support. Additionally, in 1937, the CP disbanded the ILD, the International Labor Defense, and all CP members were all CP members or all ILD members, I'm not sure, were ordered to join the NAACP, this liberal organization that they had been fighting against for years. The Stalinist opportunism of the Communist Party disillusioned many Black members who had been attracted to the Communist Party's work against racism. Though the party continued to grow, its political zigzags, dictated by the bureaucracy in Russia, ultimately compromised and undermined its commitment to fighting racism. So a little more flip-flopping to do here in this story. The Communist Party's credibility was further eroded in 1939 when, as a result of the Hitler-Stalin pact, the party briefly reversed course on the Popular Front and began denouncing FDR again. This lasted for 2 years because then in 1941, Hitler invaded Russia. And then the Communist Party went back to being FDR's biggest cheerleaders and ultra-patriotic warmongers. The party called on Blacks to subordinate their demands for integrating the army and war production industries to the success of the war effort. It denounced strikes during the war as pro-Hitler. It even supported the internment of Americans of Japanese descent in concentration camps. In 1948, C.L.R. James, great Black Trotskyist, said, "The Communist Party is now an American party, and the petty bourgeois supporters of democracy who are coming into it have nothing in common with the Negro who, finding himself an outsider, has simply left the party." Such a fucking tragedy. So wrapping up here, conclusion. The Communist Party subordinated the fight for Black freedom to Stalin's foreign policy. For most critics, this is seen as not a failure of Stalinism, but of Marxism. But nothing could be further from the truth. The party's abandonment of militant Black struggle coincided with its support for FDR, its accommodation to liberalism, and its turn away from the working class. In short, from its abandonment of Marxism. The truth is that in both periods, the Communist Party, tied as it was to the dictates of Stalin, had ceased to be a party committed to moving the class struggle forward in the United States. In its ultra-left third period, the party squandered any possibility of building genuine united fronts. It cultivated a sectarian and bureaucratic approach and failed to build a revolutionary workers' movement with a democratic culture. In the Popular Front period, the party's unprincipled alliance with liberals and uncritical devotion to FDR and other bourgeois politicians, including Southern racists, channeled the radical impulse of tens of thousands of workers away from revolutionary politics. Had the Communist Party been a genuine revolutionary party going into the Depression, one that combined a commitment to fighting racism with a willingness to unite with other forces not yet won to revolutionary ideas, it could have grown even bigger, decisively winning workers, both Black and white, away from New Deal liberalism, the NAACP, and the cul-de-sac of Black nationalism. Because it wasn't, an opportunity of great proportions was lost. After the war, the Communist Party's supposed liberal allies turned on them as the Cold War developed. Communists were systematically driven out of the workers' movement and from liberal organizations like the ACLU and the NAACP. By the end of the 1950s, middle-class Christian activists were the hegemonic leaders of the Southern civil rights movement, encouraging its early principle of nonviolent civil disobedience and a more legalistic approach than the class struggle of the communist influence movement before World War II. Thanks, comrades.